Welcome to the Lyberg conference. I am so proud to welcome everyone. You are participating from all over the world. And a special welcome to all of you here in the studio at the epicenter of Stockholm. The future of market research offers both challenges and opportunities. New technologies, declining response rates, and a fast-paced environment enables a survey landscape in constant change to flourish. Lars Lyberg and I met many years ago in Stockholm over a lunch to discuss survey quality. That conversation continued throughout our professional relationship. Lars joined us here at Demoskop as a senior advisor after a successful career at Statistics Sweden. His contribution to our success cannot be emphasized enough. His passion for quality and for exploring what is next was inspiring. He was one of the giants in the field of survey research. Unfortunately, he passed away early last year in 2021. To honor his memory and to continue the important work that he did, we have created the Lyberg Conference. And actually, today on December 1st, it would have been his 28th birthday. Election polling is a field of special interest. The accuracy is of great importance for the voters, and the impact in media is huge. In September this year, we had a general election in Sweden. At Demoskop, we recognize the important task we have, and we do everything we can to improve our models in order to deliver the highest possible quality. We are proud that we delivered the most accurate election poll both in 2018 and also this year, 2022. Today, you will listen to some of the leading scientists and experts in the world who will share their views on the future of election polling. I am truly proud to welcome Dr. Lilli Japec, Associate Professor Johan Martinsson, Dr. Måns Magnusson, Professor Claire Durand, and Joakim Malmdin, and Professor Juni Kua. We will have a coffee break of 30 minutes and we'll finish with a panel discussion. I also want to encourage you to comment or write questions in the chat function, and we will try to answer some of them. But now, let me introduce Dr. Lilli Japec, Scientific Advisor, Executive Office at Statistics Sweden. Dr. Japec has over 30 years of experience in statistics production, survey methodology, and quality management. He has held various positions at Statistics Sweden, such as Director of Research and Development and Quality Director. She has chaired and been member of numerous international task forces. She chaired American Association for Public Opinion Research Task Force on Big Data together with Professor Frauke Kreuter. Dr. Japec has authored and co-authored a number of book chapters and research papers on survey quality topics. In 2021, Dr. Japec was one of the recipients of the APER's Warren J. Mitofsky Innovators Award. Welcome, Lilli.
Thank you, Karin. Well, first of all, Karin, I'd like to thank you for this wonderful initiative in Lars' memory. And also thank you for inviting me to do the introduction today. Those of you that are familiar with Lars' work knows that a quality area was one of the area where Lars made a significant contribution to our field. And in line with that, the topic of my introduction today is quality in the digital era. One of the last papers that Lars wrote was together with Steve Heeringa on the topic of a changing survey landscape. And you can find that in the book, the Handbook of Computational Social Science, that Ove Engel and colleagues together with Lars edited. Lars and Steve, they talked about the challenges, and Karin also mentioned them already, the high non-response rates in surveys, and also the increasing survey costs. And of course, with this digital era, there are a lot of data that are being generated as we speak. And so, of course, many of us are thinking, how can we best use those data to produce statistics? Well, there is a great potential with those new data sources. I'll call them organic data. I think it was Bob Groves that first talked about organic data. But yeah, they're sometimes called big data and so on. There is a great potential. I mean, we could measure phenomena that have been very difficult to measure with surveys. And we can also measure new phenomena, such as climate change. Satellite data could be used to study climate change. And the Copernicus satellite data, for instance, they include estimates of the carbon sorry, I have to check my notes here. I'm a bit nervous, as you can see. Carbon dioxide. And we can also use social media data to study negative campaigning before elections. So those are just a few examples of how these new organic data could be used to meet user demands of wider, deeper, quicker, better, and cheaper statistics. But the real potential with those new organic data is actually if we can link them to other types of data, such as data from surveys or administrative records. So we could, for instance, if we could link the satellite data with data from health surveys, we would gain some new knowledge. But of course, there are a lot of work to be done before we can actually use those organic data to the fullest. We need to develop new statistical methods for linking, for instance. And I think the role of surveys will change. And in their paper, Lars and Steve, they talk about survey-assisted modeling. And the basic idea is that we will probably use these organic type of data and combine them. They will be the primary data source, and then we will use the probability sampling theory to do a survey in order to estimate the model parameters that are used for doing statistics based on organic data, or we could use that survey data to evaluate the model or even compensate for known problems with the organic data. So I think in the future we will still need surveys, and we will probably have to become even better at getting hold of and getting participations from groups that are hard to reach or survey. I like to mention that there is a lot of work going on within the European statistical system and also in the US in terms of looking at the potential of these data sources, the challenges, and also just looking at the infrastructure. And I would particularly like to mention a book that came out just a month or two ago on mobilizing information for the common good. You can download it, and it's a great read. So what about quality? Well, in the area of surveys and administrative data, we do have well-established quality frameworks. And in recent years, we have also seen some new frameworks looking more into this new type of data sources, such as Beamer and Amaya and digital trace data, that look at and provide a framework for how to think about those error sources. And I just learned before going on stage that my colleague here, Måns, he's actually working on the framework too. And to add on that, Sweden has been commissioned by the government to develop quality indicator for organic data. So I'm actually doing some work together with my colleague Ingegerd Jansson on this topic. So this is a work in progress. So I mentioned a number of challenges ahead of us, and the topic for today is election polls. And I think they're no different from other surveys in terms of the challenges that they are facing. In fact, I even think that they might have its own set of challenges as well. And we will learn about that more today. And I think the main message here is if we're going to deal with those challenges ahead of us, we really need to work together. We have to come together, government, private sector, academia, and survey methodologists, subject matter people, and data scientists. So I really believe that we have to work across all types of borders. And I think this conference is really in Lars' spirit when it comes to cooperating between different areas. And I hope you will enjoy the conference. And I'd just like to say cheers and have fun.
Thank you, Lilli. That was really inspiring, and I really enjoyed the photo of Lars and seeing him with a glass of wine relaxing in the sun. Next speaker is Associate Professor Johan Martinsson. Johan is a lecturer and a researcher in political science and director at the Sommer Institute at the University of Gothenburg in Sweden. His field of expertise is voting behavior, survey methodology, and people's attitudes regarding environmental issues. Johan Martinsson is also a member of Demoskop Scientific Board. Welcome, Johan.
Thank you. And I'm very happy to be here today to be able to speak a bit about the election polls in Sweden in relation to the recent election. Now, the topic of my presentation here is the Swedish election 2022 and how the... There it is. Okay, so now we go back again and start over. All right, the topic of my presentation is the Swedish election and the polls. What did we learn from it this year, and what do we need to do in order to learn more from comparing and examining the accuracy of election polls? Now, just to give a bit of brief background for those in the audience who might not be experts or familiar with the Swedish political system or the Swedish elections. So this election resulted in a shift of government from a left social democratic-led government to a right-wing coalition government. Mainly two political parties increased their vote shares in this election, the Social Democrats and the Sweden Democrats. Other parties decreased slightly, except for the Environmental Party. It was a very close election in terms of the coalition blocks, at least. The difference between the winning coalition and the losing coalition was very small, less than 1%. The polls also indicated in advance a very close election during the entire campaign, so this was nothing surprising on election day. Well, now, how did the polls do this year? Well, there are many ways to answer this, of course, and many different ways to examine the issue. If you first look at this year, all the 6 major polling companies regularly published election polls before the election. But on average, the deviation from the election result was quite small. In fact, approximately 1 percentage point if we compute the average absolute deviation per party from the election result, which is quite a good indication in my view. That means they are fairly reliable. But there are other ways, of course, also looking for examining accuracy. We should also remember that all the 6 major polls actually indicated victory for the left-wing coalition, which did not happen, but it was a very close election. So this might, of course, be simply random, but still, 6 out of 6 might at least make us want to consider a little bit if there is something systematic here or not. So why are we interested in the accuracy of election polls, really? Well, might seem obvious to most who are here today, of course, and who are listening. Otherwise, we would probably not be listening. But do we really need to predict elections? I would say no, we don't, really. There is no need for society to predict election results for political elections. I see no reason. In time, we will know anyway, right? Referendums, political elections, we don't need to predict them. Other things need to be predicted. Economic forecasting is important, the spread of disease, that needs to be forecasted, right? But elections do not really. There's no value for society to have predictions of elections, in my view, even if I'm a political scientist working on elections. But they are, comparing them to election results might, of course, say something about the general quality, about opinion polling in general. And that is something we do need. Opinion polling in general serves many different important functions in any democratic society. For example, providing information to decision makers, providing information to the public itself about what other people think about the development, and they also might describe the societal development in itself. So, of course, opinion polling in general is important in a well-functioning democratic society, but predicting elections is actually not. So, how could we learn something about this general quality of the election polling? Well, here, of course, we have this golden opportunity of a perfect benchmark. For once, we actually know the political preferences of the public. Otherwise, all we have to do is compare. Other opportunities include, of course, comparisons of register data, which we have plenty of in Sweden, but those do not include attitudes. We can compare register data on income, on ownership, and how often people are sick, perhaps, unemployment benefits, and many things, but not on attitudes. Rarely even behavioral indicators, really. And attitudes, of course, we do not have any registers, luckily. So in this case, it presents a golden opportunity to assess the quality of opinion polling. But this is only one of them, and I think we should look for more ways and find more benchmarks that might be similar. But I'll return to that topic in the last section, when I would like to discuss a little bit what we could do to learn more about the quality of election polls and opinion polling in general. So, well, how did the Swedish election polls do this year? First question, did they pick the right winning coalition? No, they didn't, as we saw. In 2014, all of them did, but it was a clear election result. It was not a narrow margin for the winning left-wing Social Democratic coalition. In 2018, yes, most did, with some single exception, and this was also a very close election. But this year, none of them did. Okay, of course, this could be due to late shifters. People who switched the vote intention because the main data collection for the last published election polls were during the last week or so. But in fact, the Swedish television, public service television exit poll also predicted a left-wing coalition victory. And there was also one in Channel 4 published an election day poll, also indicating a left bloc victory, actually. So we have 8 cases out of 8 who got the bloc wrong, okay? Even if the average error per party was fairly good. 1.1% is a good result. That's a reliable survey, I would say. So, of course, 8 out of 8, it's difficult to believe it's simply a coincidence. It could be, and some clever statistician here today could probably help me compute the probability for this happening, actually. It shouldn't be too difficult, but it's too difficult for me, so I haven't even tried it. So anyway, it seems implausible that it's purely a coincidence, really. Now, but if we look at the accuracy of election polls with a better metric, because I believe the best metric is the average absolute deviation per party, over time, since 2002, we get the following numbers. Of course, the exact might differ depending on specifically how we compute them, if we include other parties or not, and so on. But in this presents the development over time. 1.1 percentage points average absolute deviation this year. It's not a record low, but it's still better than last time in 2018. And I would say what this tells us is simply that the quality is more or less the same for 20 years. And it's fairly good overall. Combining all the election polls, of course. All of them were not equally good each year, but still, this is what's happening. So despite all the talk about declining response rates, increasingly difficult to reach respondents, and this is true, both of them actually, but still election polls in Sweden are not worse today than they have been the last 20 years. So on average, Swedish polls seems to be fairly accurate. But this year at least, they systematically failed to pick the right winning coalition. But also, we should remember, they are not designed to pick a winning coalition. No, they are not really. They are designed to give one national estimate of the vote share for each party, and nothing else. So, but over time, they are not less accurate today. Now, I would like to discuss a bit the polling methods and overview here. In 2022, the following 6 companies were active: Demoskop, Ipsos, Kantar, Novus, and Sentio and Scoop, in alphabetical order, published regularly in main media outlets their election polls. Now, up until 2014, 2 main methods were basically used: probability-based telephone surveys and non-probability-based web panels. And the non-probability-based web panels only appeared in 2010. Before that, we didn't have any regularly published non-probability web panels for election polls in Sweden. After 2014, on the other hand, there is much larger variation in terms of the methodology, the sampling, even the modeling, the weighting methods, and the mode than before. So now, before we had 2 camps, so to speak, very clear-cut and easy to understand. Now each of these polling companies have quite a unique methodology. And here's an overview. 1 out of the 6 now, only 1, relies exclusively on telephone polling. 2 out of 6 relies exclusively on non-probability-based panels. 2 out of 6 mixed modes using both telephones and web panels, but where both are actually probability-based. And 1 out of 6 rely only on the probability-based web panel, but there is very sparse information about this particular company's methodology actually. And 1 out of 6 has also clearly, I would say, is a bit subjective, but more complex weighting model than the other ones. The main weighting models in Swedish election polls are, well, basically based on some variation of post-stratification weighting based on age, gender, geography, and most of all, of course, the previous vote in the previous election. And of course, each company adds a little bit of their own flavor and methods to this basis, okay? But one of them has a significantly more complex model, actually, where they also include weighting to survey-based benchmarks, data from other surveys including, and half of them at least partly include data from telephone surveys. So there is no longer 2 camps: telephone-based, probability-based surveys and non-probability-based web panels. We have instead a larger mixture here. Now, which methods have been most accurate historically? This, of course, we should remember, it's very difficult to draw any firm conclusions based on these few cases. There is always a lot of randomness in which company arrives at the closest in their last published election poll before an election. So we have to be careful, and firm conclusions from single elections is not possible. We should also remember the backdrop here that the scientific literature mainly still speak in favor of probability-based samples, and they are on average more accurate in the international studies I have seen. Also, an article by myself and 2 colleagues, Jacob Solberg and Michael Gilliam, published a few years ago, examined this issue in Sweden for the period of 2006 to 2014, and found the same, that on average during that period, non-probability-based election polls were 0.2 percentage points less accurate. But now, a lot has happened after 2014. For example, the non-probability-based election polls in Sweden were introduced in 2010. And as you also saw on my previous slides here, the methods have developed in various directions here. So now, if we instead look at the last 4 elections where we have this large variation. 2010, a probability-based telephone survey came closer to the election, and a non-probability-based web panel the furthest away from election. But the last 3 elections, as mentioned before here today, non-probability-based web panels or a mixture of telephone and non-probability-based web panels have been close to the election result. And the furthest away have been, in 2014, a probability-based telephone survey, but also in the last 2 elections, a non-probability-based web panels. So in the last 2 elections, they have provided both the best and the worst cases, which is also in accordance with international studies and reports I've seen somewhere, that those who deviate the most from benchmarks are usually also non-probability-based web panels here. For example, so in my view, we can't draw any firm conclusions concerning the methods, but we could see that we have mixed results, and a traditional probability-based telephone survey has not been the most accurate since 2010 now in Sweden, and non-probability or mixed sample has been closest for the 3 last elections. So both methods can obviously provide good estimates of the election results. But we should also remember those who deviate the most in the last 2 elections, where the average absolute deviation has been higher than 2 percentage points, even 2.5, 2.7 in one occasion, has been non-probability-based web panels. So what can we learn here? Well, still very few observations, too much random influence to draw any really firm conclusions. But it seems clearly possible to use various methods to arrive at an accurate election poll. Right, so to my last slide here, finally I get to speak about what I really want to talk about today on one slide, after this overview of the quality and accuracy of the election polling in Sweden, is what we need to do to learn more, because the conclusions we can draw are fairly limited. We can see mixed methods, various methods are being used, and they have arrived at good results overall over time in Sweden in the last 2 decades. But what should we do to learn more from this? Well, I have a few ideas, some more realistic than others perhaps, but one thing is, it could be extremely valuable to look at unweighted comparisons to the election results, which is usually not published or never published from the private polling companies, really. And why would it be interesting? Well, we don't know if it is, most people would expect, including myself, that modeling plays a larger role today than 20 years ago. But we don't know because it's not published, right? But that's the expectation for most people. For example, how much worse are the actual samples today, unweighted, than they were 20 years ago? That would be extremely interesting. And also, those who arrive close to that election, is it usually because they have better samples, the actual data, or is it because they're using a superior model? That would teach us much more than simply comparing the election polls to the election results, if we could look at both here, actually. And it's not, the intention is not to embarrass anyone, it's simply to learn more about what works and why it works, really. So more transparency, collaborations, and unweighted comparisons would be one way. Looking at groups, this might sound a bit strange, because we don't know how different groups in society vote, because we don't have registers on party choice, once again, luckily. But we could do something else. I mean, ecological inference is, of course, have many problems, but we could try to look at strategically chosen, selected geographical areas. For example, comparing highly urban areas and rural areas, or high socioeconomic status areas and low socioeconomic status areas, and see, are the same polling methods most accurate for various groups or not? Because in theory, those who arrive the closest to the election result, they might do it by overestimating the support in one group and underestimating it in another, and simply be best in terms of an average that doesn't exist, right? Or not. But we don't know. Or are different methods better suited for foreign-born, rural areas, low-income areas? We don't know unless this could be examined. And of course, elections once again provide a good benchmark here, because we do know how people vote in geographical areas, and we have lots of contextual statistics. The problem? Well, most election polls have very small samples, not very small, okay, but too small for these kind of comparisons. And secondly, they are not designed to make a good estimate of, for example, a low socioeconomic status area. Once again, would the same weighting model work? Probably not, for example. That's only the beginning. But that could be a very interesting avenue to learn more here also, if you could look at specific strategically chosen areas with different demographic composition. Also, other benchmarks, being more creative. Referendums, for example. Registers I've mentioned, but they do not contain attitudes. But we have local referendums in connection to elections. Here could also the accuracy of various polling firms and polling methods, in theory, be examined in the same way. And we would have a wider set of benchmarks and simply party choice. That would also provide a golden opportunity. But it would also, of course, require larger samples, collaborations in some way, maybe partnerships between universities and polling companies, or several companies also working together. So I would like to put forward here 3 ideas for how we could learn more for comparisons and examinations of the accuracy of election polls in different ways. We could examine unweighted data. We could look at strategically choosing geographical areas with different interesting demographic compositions, preferably fairly extreme compositions, to get closer to specific groups. And also other benchmarks such as referendums. These might not be available today. With the right planning, it might be some other day. Thank you.
Thank you, Johan. It's truly interesting to listen to your presentation. Next speaker is Måns Magnusson. Måns Magnusson is Assistant Professor in Statistics at Department of Statistics at Uppsala University. Before joining Uppsala University, he was a postdoc on the Aki Vehtari at the Department of Computer Science at Aalto University in Finland. And he holds a PhD from Linköping University in Sweden, supervised by Mattias Villani. In 2019, Magnusson was awarded the Cramér Prize for the best dissertation in statistics and mathematical statistics in Sweden. Måns Magnusson is also a member of Demoskop's scientific board. Welcome, Måns.
Thank you, thank you. All right, I should try to avoid the same. All right, there we have it. That's perfect. All right, yeah, so I'm going to present Bayesian poll averaging model for election predictions. I think I start in a tough spot now when Johan was presenting and saying that we don't really need this, and that's of course true, but it's still very interesting and also fun to work with. So this is joint work together with Jonas Wallin at Lund University, Department of Statistics, and Jens Finnes. He's a data journalist at Journalism Plus and Newsworthy. And this is our little project robot called Botten Ada that we worked with this election. So what did we do? So we built a Bayesian model to average polls and combine that with structural information to do a prediction for the Swedish election in 2022. We draw a lot of inspiration from the paper by Lindsay in 2013 that did a similar thing for the American election. But we also had to adopt this type of models to the Swedish setting, where the problem is a little bit different. We have a multi-party system. We also have this 4% threshold that parties need to get into the parliament. I will not go into all the nitty-gritty details of this model because it can be quite complex, but there is a more in-depth presentation given by Jonas and me at the Institute for Future Studies, and you can access it online if you really want to dig into the details. So this is an example of the prediction we did in, I think, late June for the Center Party in Sweden. And we did this in a collaboration with Svenska Dagbladet, one of the major newspapers in Sweden. And you can see our prediction there for the Center Party was 6.9%, and the election result was 6.7%, I think. So it was a quite okay prediction for the Center Party already in June. All right, so now we'll see if this... now they start to run back there. Yeah. Okay, yeah, so this model consists of 2 parts. The first is a state-space model. And what is a state-space model? It has 2 components. And this is the only equation I will show today. But they are quite good to get an understanding of how this model works. So we have a dynamic component, xt, that is the latent party vote intention. So that is what we are interested in. And that follows a distribution, in our case a normal distribution, based on the previous time point with some random noise added. So it's a random walk kind of model. And you can see an example of this. This is simulated data where this dynamic component is the red line. So that is like a simulated of how a political party could evolve over time. But we don't see that red line, except for during elections, right? So what we then have is the measurement equation, and that's the measurements YT. And that is political opinion polls in Sweden. And that each poll has some kind of probability distribution, depending on this, conditional on this red line, this underlying true party vote intention. And we also have some noise there. All the polls are, measured, trying to measure this underlying red line. And you can see the black dots here are the simulated polls around this red line. And you can see that it's kind of noisy around that underlying red line. So what we really want to do when we build these types of models is try to estimate that red line as good as possible. So we did that for multi-party systems in general, like multi-party situations. And this is an example where we estimate the Sweden Democrats, one of the parties in Sweden. They entered the party in 2010, and they have polls back to around 2006. So the dynamic part of our model is a multivariate normal logistic model. What that means is that we need to model parties that sum to 1, right? So, and that is actually something we can see here. So you see, we can actually estimate the Sweden Democrats even where we don't have any polls, because we have all the other parties, right? So that's one part, to have this multivariate component to the model. The other thing we had to this dynamic part is that during elections we could see that parties, the vote intention, move much more rapid than they do between the elections. The second thing that we added, and this has been around, at least the two first parts has been around. So we added house bias. So some institutes seem to overestimate, especially the Sweden Democrats. And you can see that over here, there's this swarm of polls that tend to overestimate the Sweden Democrats. And we need to include this in the model to be able to estimate this underlying latent vote intention in a good way. Then we also added design effects, and that is a way to correct that, like the effective number of samples each poll has. So we try to weigh down the polls essentially a little bit to actually fit this model in a good way. But the last thing, and I think that is the most important, and that connects also to what Johan is talking about, is what we refer to as industry bias. And what we mean by industry bias is that all polls are wrong. All 6 institutes are wrong. And you could see that quite clearly as in Johan's presentation, that they all thought that the red bloc would win this election. So we include that in the model, and especially here in 2014 for the Sweden Democrats, you can see that almost all polls are around here somewhere. So there is this kind of industry structure that seemed to be that there is a risk that all institute gets a party wrong. So that was the state-space model that we started with. And then we used this idea from Lindsay 2013, and that is that we added a structural prediction. So you can see here is the state-space part of the model, you can think of it, polls coming in, and this is the election day, right? So what Lindsay introduced was that we can use another model to predict where we think that the intention will be at the actual election. And we did the same, but we needed to adopt this to the Swedish situation. So what we did was we fit the Bayesian, robust linear regression, and hierarchical linear regression to be more detailed, but with only 3 variables. First, previous election. So using the previous election as some kind of starting point. Then we used the Statistics Sweden survey in May at the election date. So that's why we couldn't do the predictions before, like in June, essentially, because that's when the Statistics Sweden survey came out this year. And we also, because we have that data back to 1973, so we can use those two data points. And then we add, I don't know what to call it, but I call it like a small party component. We can see that small parties that are around this threshold, they seem to get a bump historically in the data. I don't know, some call it like a tactical voting effect. Some talk about like media effects and so forth. I'm no political scientist, so I just call it a small party component to get away from that. So that was our structural model that did the prediction on the actual election day. So how did it go? So this is a little bit of the brag slide because it went quite good. So we ended up with the smallest error of all. We were better than Demoskop. We were better than SVT Valu. We were better than all other polls and all other polling institutions. And this was put out by Jens after the final count came in. We actually also got the number of mandates in the parliament exactly right. So it was fun, but to be honest, it was mostly luck. So we're not a magician in any way. But as Jonas said, I mean, maybe it was luck that we also deserved a little bit. So why did we succeed this well? And the reason is what also Johan was talking a little bit about. So this is the last polls in relation to the election results in 2018 and 2022. So I mentioned this with the industry bias kind of effect. And you can see here that, for example, in 2018, the left-wing party, V, was overestimated in all polls in the end. And so they were in 2022. We could see that the Social Democrats was underestimated in 2018 by all institutes, and almost all were wrong also in 2022. And you can go on, it's the same with the moderates or the conservative. They were underestimated this time, and they were also underestimated the last year. So this is mainly the reason why we actually got it right. And we were actually one of the few that actually thought that the right-wing coalition would win. We just gave them 55%, so we shouldn't take too much credit. It was luck. But it essentially boils down to this kind of what we call an industry bias that made it possible for us to try to do this kind of correction in the predictions. But we also did some mistakes that didn't work very well. And this is maybe the slide of shame, so to say. And this was the prediction we made for the Liberal Party in the 7th of September. So we just got in some polls during the last week. And as you can see, actually the model just dropped and predicted that they would get 3.1%. I think they got 4.8 or something like that. It's still within the confidence interval, but this was an obvious flaw when we saw this. So we had to try to correct this. And this is what did not work very well in the model. And the reason for this was that we modeled the latent political opinion by week. And what happens during this last election period is that we started to get polls on a daily level, where we're very short collection period. And our granularity, we model this on a weekly level. So what happens actually behind here is that we got one new poll. So all the polls were around 5% for the Liberal Party. And then there came in one poll with one day that collected in the new week, the election week, with 4%. So the model thought that, okay, so 5% and plus 3%, yeah, that makes it 4%. So that's a reasonable thing to estimate. So, and the problem why this happened was that the Liberal Party was too dynamic in our model and became too flexible. And the reason for that is that we had to if we look at the Liberal Party historically, they can do a lot of changes in the last weeks during the election cycle. They have increased a lot. So historically, they have this kind of, they can move a lot. But that also combined with this weekly modeling flaw of the model made that we did this incorrect prediction. In the end, it worked out quite well anyway, but this is one of the lessons that we learned when we did these predictions. So that was all I had to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Måns. That was really inspiring and putting the light on new methodology and how we can work going forward. Now we're going over to the more international section of the Lyberg conference, and we will listen to Claire Durand, who is a professor of methodology in the Department of Sociology at Université de Montréal. She is the outgoing president of the World Association for Public Opinion Research, WAPOR. Her research deals with the impact of methodology on the quality of survey estimates and on the use of multi-level analysis to analyze harmonized data sets related to institutional trust. She has particularly focused her research on electoral polls, on the impact of models of administration and sampling sources on the estimation of the votes in the US, France, UK and Canada. I'm very glad to present Claire Durand.
Hi everybody. So it's not that international. I have 4 countries, but I will speak about 3 of them, and mostly about the US. Since I have 30 slides, I'm going to start right now rapidly. Can you, Christopher, can you put my slides on? Yeah. Okay. I will speak about the US and then about the last French 2022 presidential election, some other example in Canadian Quebec polls, and then limitations and conclusions. So why speak about the 2016 presidential election? Because it was a shock, and it looks like it was a shock because we see that the pollsters reacted to the 2016 presidential election by modifying their methods. So what happened then is that aggregators published probabilities of 66 to 90% that Clinton would be elected. Aggregators produced weighted poll average, but they do not formally take into account modes of administration. Contrary to prediction, Trump was elected, but in terms of the popular vote, the polls were rather close to the final results. But it was a shock for people anyhow. What happened? I just want to show you here that even in 2016, we have 3 modes at that time: live phone, web opt-in, and IVR. IVR polls in the US are mixed modes. Because IVR cannot call cell phones, so they have to combine web opt-in polls. And what we see is that the green line there show that IVR polls predicted support for Clinton better than the others. And what we already see is that the trends are not the same. The blue line just in the middle, the dark blue line, is for web polls, and it traces stable support for Clinton, while the 2 others show raise and increase and then decrease between the 3 debates. So the next thing that happened is that I looked at the 2020 US presidential election. First, looking only at the main mode of administration, but I rapidly realized that you cannot just use the main mode, because some have 3 modes and almost the same number of respondents by mode. What is interesting with US presidential election compared with Sweden or Canada or France is that they have 51 pollsters working, publishing at least one poll during the election, 222 independent polls, and this is only at the national level. So 33% of the pollsters conducted only one poll, while 20% conducted at least one poll per week. In addition to US pollsters, in that election, there were Canadian pollsters, 3 of them, British pollsters, and 1 Brazilian pollster. Some pollsters, it is obvious that some pollsters, unhappy with their 2016 performance, tried to improve it by resorting to new modes and sources. So, in order to analyze these polls, I did a new categorization of polls. One is polls using mixed mode. It includes combinations of IVR, web opt-in, live telephone, and web probabilistic. And so this is for 3 modes, and for there are 7 pollsters who use 2 modes and 3 who use 3 modes. The second category is polls using only opt-in panels. It includes pollsters using exclusively 1 or more opt-in panels, and then polls using 1 mode but not opt-in panel, and most of them are probabilistic. We speak about live phone, web probabilistic, mobile online, that includes recruitment by using web apps. So what do we get? The mean for these polls, mixed mode, web opt-in, or 1 mode, not web opt-in, are quite similar, but the standard error is different. We see that web opt-in poll have a lower standard error than the others. Mixed mode have the highest standard error. So what are we going to look at? We're going to look at whether the polls trace the same trends in a change over time of support for Biden. And then we are going to validate this with multi-level analysis. And then I will look at the polls of the last 10 days to show you what it means concretely for the last 10 days of the election. So what do we have? We have this, like the lower trend here is for mixed mode. And 52.2% is what Biden got if we, in the election, if we look at Biden over Trump plus Biden. So it's almost perfect prediction. Up there, you have 1 mode, not web opt-in, the violet line. It also, and these 2 lines show that support for Biden went up till the middle of the campaign and then down. In the middle, you have the web opt-in poll, and as in 2016, they show a flat line. Nothing happened during the campaign. Of course, there is heterogeneity within each group. Okay, but on the average, and this is local regression, so weighted regression of poll estimates. So the trends portrayed by mixed mode polls and by polls who do not use opt-in panel is quadratic, while the polls using only opt-in panel show a stable trend. And polls using mixed mode have a close to perfect forecast of the results. But what we had does not take into account different other features of the poll, whether they use a likely voter model, for example. So I did this multi-level analysis. What is interesting with the US situation, I have 51 pollsters conducting 222 polls. So we can see polls as being nested within pollster. So we can look at the effect of the characteristic of the pollsters and the effect of the characteristic of the polls, and one of these is when they were conducted. I will not go through this, you would not see anything anyhow, but what I can tell you is that 55% of the difference between polls estimates is due to pollsters, the fact that different pollsters conduct the polls. But if we want to explain that, we have everything is not significant except the fact that, and this is the last column, there are different trends. Controlling for everything else that we have as information on the pollsters and the polls, the different modes have different trends. On average, there is no difference. If you just take the average, there is no difference, but there is only a difference in trends. And if I put this equation in on a graph, I get this. This is the lower trend. Here is the trend for mixed mode, and zero is here is zero error. And up there, this is for one mode, but not web opt-in, and you have over the upper line is for web polls. So we conclude that mixed mode led to no error on average, taking into account the characteristic of the polls and of the pollsters. So now, concretely, what do we see? On 46 polls conducted during the last 10 days, I will just go back here to show you that this line. So this is where you have the more difference between the different combination of sample and mode. And I took only these 10 days left, the polls that were conducted here. You see here that in the beginning, there are lots of difference. In the middle, about no difference. In the end, lots of difference, which is normal if you have quadratic trends for some and stable trend for others. So I took the polls for the last 10 days. And what I get is this. If I take only the polls who were within their margin of error and within 1 point from the final results, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 polls on 6, 9, and on 13 that are mixed mode. Okay, all those. I have 3 polls that are one mode but not web opt-in. Mostly telephone. No, these ones are RDE. I will speak about RDE later on. And only 4 polls that are web opt-in. And among the polls that use web opt-in or are web opt-in, among the polls who use the web, 1 is multiple source, 2, 5 are RDE. What is RDE? Okay, this is called, some called it random device engagement, and Swayable told me that their method was similar to random device engagement, though they didn't call it that way. It is a way to recruit people using web apps, but the difference with web opt-in is the fact that the sample change every poll. And you see that two of them use propensity scores and one use multiple source. Now, if we look at the polls who were the worst, those who were outside the margin of error, they are almost all of them web opt-in only. And none of them is multiple source. And lots of them use voter recall. This partly because they are UK polls. And in the UK, as in France, people use waiting by voter recall. So they tell me that I have only 2 minutes left, so I will rush that. For the French presidential election, what happened? Okay, French presidential election, everybody uses web polls. One pollster's web opt-in and often the same opt-in source. But one pollster decided to do differently and have a more probabilistic method. And he received recurrent warnings from the Survey Commission, which monitors the poll in France. And what happened is this pollster tended to have a higher estimation of the extremes, in short, Mélenchon and Zemmour. So you see here for Mélenchon that they finish at the same with the same estimation, but at the beginning they were higher. In fact, and they were true. Mélenchon was underestimated. But for Le Pen, they underestimated Le Pen and more than the other pollsters. So there was a difference between this pollster using more probabilistic methods and the other pollsters, and all the other pollsters, 6 of them, had the same estimation. In summary, what happens? In the US, the emergence, it started a bit before, but there is an emergence of new ways of doing polls, various combination of IVR, live phone, and web. There is the use of voter files, address-based sample to recruit for panels mostly, and for the web polls, number of pollsters using multiple source, random device engagement, reverse sampling, text to web, phone to web, and perhaps we will have a video interview coming soon. In France, we had cluster 17 who use a list of email addresses to build new samples, and is sample deferred for each poll, contrary to opt-in panels. And in Canada, we have the same. So we have even the Canadian Municipal Election Study that use sequential 3 modes: contact using IVR, interview to get the email address, and questionnaire sent through email. Ipsos uses multiple modes, 3 sampling sources for its web surveys and 1/4 telephone interviews. ResearchCo use 2 sources, one of them being Lucid, also used in the US. Some use 2 modes, web with probability sample and telephone interviews. So lots of pollsters are using more and more, not only multiple sources, but also multiple modes and also multiple sources, and sometimes one mode and multiple sources. The limitation of this study is that I'm still working on this, trying to get more information, and I will have normally data from a US pollster who use 3 modes, where I will be able to compare unweighted data according to the mode, to each mode. But the limitation is, of course, that though there has been substantial improvement in transparency in recent years in the US, in France, and elsewhere, it is still rather difficult to find all the relevant methodological information in the pollsters' reports and in the media. And we have to keep in mind that there is some heterogeneity within mode and source category, and part of the differences in estimate may be partially due to other methodological practices though for the web post we have 39 posters, so it's not possible that you can attribute this difference between the web posters and the two other categories only to different modeling. So in conclusion, in many countries, some posters seem to think that opt-in panels are not a reliable method anymore, at least on the long term. There is emergence of new methodologies, combining modes, sampling sources, reintroducing randomness, which do not always give the same estimate of support or of trends or of forecasting support. Questions for which we have to question for which periods and using which methods are polls reliable to forecast. We cannot rely completely on the US, where there's not much movement during campaigns. We have other countries where there is much more movement, usually like Canada, Quebec, France, etc. We think that we have multiple polls, but if the sampling source is the same or is homogeneous across polls, then what? Do we really have multiple independent polls? It is highly probable that in the US, there are not 39 different web opt-in panels, okay? And some posters take their data from the same panel. Same in France. We need to monitor these new developments and not analyze polls as if they were all equal and differences between them are random or not relevant. I think they are relevant, and as academic, because now I am in the position of the academic, we have to monitor what's happening in the private polling industry. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Claire. It was truly a very good overview how complex this industry is and how hard it is to make election polling these days, and of course other surveys as well. Another topic is how we measure and evaluate quality in surveys, and I am very happy to welcome Joachim Malmdin. Joachim is an advisor statistics sector at Statistics Center in Abu Dhabi. He holds a PhD licentiate from Umeå University in Sweden, and he has also worked for Swedish Statistics for several years, where he, among other roles, held the position as the Director of Quality Management and Head of Method Unit. He has previously been the chairman of Swedish Statistical Society, and he is also a member of Demoskop Scientific Board. Welcome, Joachim.
Thank you very much, Karin. I'm so pleased to be here, and I have enjoyed all the talks so far, Lars. I will talk about the quality control in the new survey landscape, and I will try to use my experience within the field of official statistics and quality management as a stepping stone looking into this area. Can you see my presentation now? No. Here we go. Thank you so much. So, the first question is whether we have a new landscape or not. And I think it's not controversial to actually say that we have. But with reference to what time we have this new survey landscape. Looking 40 years back in time, we had almost no non-response in our service. We had no social media, as far as we know it, and no mobile phones existed. Some countries, however, use administrative data for statistical purposes. Nordic countries, especially, They started to use administrative data for statistical purposes back in the 60s already. And I think it was Denmark who, within this time period, also conducted the first fully or totally register-based census. And new data sources, they might have existed, but we didn't have access to them. So, looking 20 years back, we had some non-response on emerging social media, and mobile phones were on the rise. The use of administrative data within the production of official statistics still emerging at this time. And in a few years' time, I think that all Nordic countries have conducted their surveys with all the censuses with just registers. And we also at this time had some ideas on how to use new data sources within the production of official statistics. So that is 20 years from now. Going further, 20 years to today, as we all are aware of, we have more non-response, a lot of social media. Mobile phones have completely taken over as a communication tool. The new data sources are used within the production of official statistics. And one good example, I think, is the use of transaction data within the production of consumer price index in quite many countries today. And we also have heard about something called Statistics 4.0. That is how we actually combine administrative data together with new data sources and much less survey data than we used to have within the production of official statistics. And I will remind you of the book that Walter Rademacher, the former Director General of Eurostat, wrote some years ago, called Official Statistics 4.0. So what this concept is all about is that we are changing our view of how to produce statistics with less and less sampled data in favor of administrative data. So how about the opinion polls? Well, the use of panels within the opinion polls or within the survey landscape also has changed a lot in the last 40 years. When I use the word panel now, I am not talking about those kind of panels we use for longitudinal surveys or following subjects over time. I'm more into the concept of web panels here. 20 years ago, at least in Sweden, it was still debatable on how to use web panels. And the most of the debate was about how to use a probabilistic approach. But if we look at the survey companies today, how many are not using any sort of panel in their production of statistics? So we have a change here, or a shift from a theoretical point of view. Within official statistics, we have seen this change as a less degree of the probabilistic element in favor of administrative data and new data sources. And we could say, or put it like, that the sampling was the core and supported by admin data. And today we have a view that is challenging that. Now my remote control doesn't work properly here. Okay, let's see if I can go one step further here. Okay, so during all these years, it's happened a lot during the production of official statistics. And one of my present colleagues from Statistics Netherlands shared this data with me. At CBS, before 1985, they used only survey data for the production of official statistics. The following 30 years to come, they used more and more admin data, and in the end of that period, under 80% reduction in survey data was the fact. And after that, they only used a small amount or a minimal amount of survey footprint in the production of statistics. The combination of admin data and new data sources is almost everything they use nowadays. So how about quality control in the new landscape? We have these 5 quality components recognized internationally: relevance, accuracy, timeliness and punctuality, accessibility and clarity, and the 5th one is comparability and coherence. And when talking about quality control, it's about controlling the process. When it comes to the output, we can't control anything. And in the new area, we see that we can't even control the input data. We're getting data collected for other purposes than production of statistics. So what we can control is the process. So that is the new landscape, I would say, especially within production of official statistics. But I do think that this also will affect the survey area in the years to come. So it seems like the change in conditions for this statistical production mostly affects the 2 first of the quality components, relevance and accuracy. The relevance is mainly about getting to know the user's needs in order to decide upon the purpose. So these questions: what are the reasons for the statistics being produced? How is it going to be used, and by whom and when? That's what we want to know within this relevance component. The accuracy component is in a very, very simplified way about how to handle, measure, or document the uncertainty that comes with all statistical output. So when I say that we are going to handle a process with data that we didn't actually design the quality of, I mean that the relevance component and the accuracy components are the most crucial components to handle. The timeliness and punctuality, of course, very, very important for all statistics, and I think, according to opinion polls, the timeliness is extremely important. I can't think of any more timely statistics produced than exit polls, for example. Accessibility and clarity, sorry. Of course, always need to be accessible and understandable, but how are we communicating the statistical results? We know that we have some experience of reports in the newspapers on how to actually interpret the results of polls. That might be questionable. Comparability and coherence. Well, this is a quality component that I think might come to be more and more in focus. Could we actually compare the results from different institutes? And how will we do it? For the future of official statistics, I think that once again we have to learn to know the input data quality, or I think we could put it like the properties of the data in order to control the process. And we will see the elements of survey data minimized. When it comes to quality control for the future survey landscape, we will probably depend upon the possibility to combine panel data with admin and new data sources to a much higher degree than we have seen so far. And this will, of course, give us both opportunities and challenges. Timeliness, for example, could be one challenge. Transparency in the choice of methodology will most certainly be continuing to be an issue. Will the users still or be satisfied with constrained information, or will they ask for more? So what I will like to say here is that we are facing a new business model for the survey institutions in the years to come. To meet the need for more timely and relevant information, I think that the survey institutions also need to adapt the new data landscape. What is there to explore, and how could they do it? And how will they be able to, or find possibilities to combine survey data with smartwatches, mobile phones, transaction data, Internet of Things, sensor data, etc., etc. Of course, we haven't talked about it, and this is not an issue for this conference, but the questions on integrity will, of course, be in focus. So, as in the case of official statistics, if we do that comparison, the input data quality from new data sources will most certainly also be crucial for quality control in the new survey landscape. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joachim. It's truly interesting to listen to ways of improving and monitoring survey quality and quality of data in general. Finally now, this part of the conference, we will meet Joni Kuha. Joni is a professor of social statistics at London School of Economics and Political Science. His methodological research focuses on statistical methods which are motivated by application of statistics in the social sciences. He also collaborates with social scientists in various disciplines on substantive research projects on different topics. He has been the member of the analysis and prediction team of the exit poll of the 4 most recent UK parliamentary elections, and was a member of the expert panel which examined the reasons for the poor performance of the national pre-election polls before the 2015 election. Welcome, Joni.
Thank you. Thank you, Karin. Good afternoon, everyone. I will finish off these talks part of this afternoon with a bit of light relief by talking about a very peculiar kind of election polling, namely the kind that takes place during election day itself, in other words, exit polling, as soon as the slides come up. My example of that comes from the UK, where I work, where there is, as soon as the clicker works, there we go, where there is one of these exit polls for per election, by which I mean the parliamentary election, which elects the members of parliament for the House of Commons every 5 years or so, most recently 2019. What happens in this election poll, like any election, this exit poll, as in any other exit poll, is that a set of polling stations is selected, and in them a sample of voters is interviewed when they come out of the voting station. They're basically asked, who did you just vote for? It's a survey with one question and one question only. And they answer the question by filling in a mock ballot paper and dropping it into a mock ballot box, just like they did in the polling station itself. The data from this is then taken forward and it's used to produce a prediction of the election result, which is published as soon as it's legal to do that, which is 10 o'clock in the evening when the polls close. And it's published in the form of a numbers as in for the election itself, how many seats in the parliament will each party get. And I will tell you a little bit about that very briefly in today's talk. If you want to know more, there's a reference at the bottom. You can find it easily enough if you Google those 6 words at the bottom of each of these slides. So if you just type Jouni Kuha exit polls in Britain, it'll come up early on in the search results, along with other information about the same topic. There we go. There are some pictures of what it looks like over the years. So a couple of those pictures are what you would see at 10 o'clock in the TV broadcast when the prediction is announced. A few of those other pictures are pictures of the prediction projected onto the sides of various public buildings in London. So it's quite a visible exercise because it's done by visible actors. It's paid for by the 3 major broadcasting corporations, BBC, ITV and Sky, who run the major election programs on the day, valvakor in Swedish terms. They pay for it together, there's just the one shared exercise. The fieldwork is done by a polling company, Ipsos Mori most recently. They are the ones who send the hundreds of interviews out to those polling stations to stand out there and do the interviewing. The data then comes from a much smaller set of people, the analysis team, who produce the prediction, the way I'll describe. That's my role. I've been in that team for the past 4 elections. The whole thing, i.e. the methodology of the research design, was developed for the 2005 election by David Firth, a statistician, and John Curtis, now Sir John, a political scientist. And it has been used in this form basically ever since, for 5 elections. And quite successfully so. In every one of those 5 elections, it has produced a correct prediction in the sense of telling the right story, qualitatively speaking, and also quantitatively got the numbers as close as it's reasonable to expect them to be. So what you see here are 2 examples, the last 2, 2017, 2019. Those numbers are now members of parliament for each of the main parties. The black one is the exit poll prediction, so this is what the viewer would have seen at 10 o'clock. The blue one is the final result, the actual election result, about 10 hours later. And the red one is the difference, the prediction error, so to speak. Those are satisfactory, to say the least. In both of those elections, for example, the Conservative Party won the election, more or less, and we got their number, which is the crucial one, very close. And same in the other ones as well. Which is a very satisfactory and satisfying result, because this is not an easy exercise. Like any empirical research question, this is done within constraints of data and other difficulties. In this case, in particular, constraints set by the UK electoral system, which, as you know, is the winner-takes-all or first-past-the-post system. So there are 650 constituencies, and in each of them, they elect 1 MP. Whoever takes the most votes gets to be MP for that constituency. So in essence, it's 650 separate elections, and the results of one constituency don't really tell you all that much about what may happen in the other ones. It's also a fairly slow process by modern standards. Nothing's counted before 10 o'clock, not even the postal votes. It starts there. They're counted separately by constituency. No results are released in a sort of partial form from any constituency. So what we get is the final results for in each of them. When the constituency is ready, they announce the winner and the official results, and that's it. That takes time. For most of them, 4, 5, 6 hours. So the declarations start coming at sort of 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning. And they don't come in any random order either. So it takes a while for the result of the overall election to become clear from this if you're just staring at those declarations, especially since the system is highly non-proportional. So even if I gave you the final national vote shares to begin with, you still wouldn't be able to tell very clearly what the MP counts will be. So it is challenging. The last point there mentions something a bit more technical, which is that even at the end of it all, the results are not declared and sort of made public at the polling station level, but only at the constituency level. That's not very interesting on this slide, but it will become relevant from when we start designing the exit poll. Okay, so it's challenging, it's got this setting, which is both an opportunity and a challenge. The opportunity is the fact that because there's no real understanding of the results from the actual declarations until 4, 5, 6 hours later, there's a big space available for the exit poll. So it is a very highly prominent and visible thing, as you saw earlier in the pictures, now that people started trusting it, which is sort of interesting for us. Here I might take a moment to address one of Johan's points earlier on. If we don't need pre-election polls, for really, for humanity's sake, we certainly don't need an exit poll, because all you have to do is to sleep overnight and you'll find the result. So it's basically political show business, but it's very popular show business. And perhaps BBC's public service defense here would refer to that by saying that the election broadcasts are by far the most watched public affairs programming. So they might say that, okay, for those 2 hours times 10 million people or whatever it is, they might as well be informed well rather than less well as a basis for the discussions that they hear in the broadcast. Be that as may, the challenge is that this is hard to do methodologically in terms of get those predictions. So I'll talk more about that. It's challenging in both elements of the research design, which is the data collection and the analysis. Data collection first. It's a pretty big survey. 2019, the most recent one, had about 24,000 respondents were the basis for that 10 o'clock prediction. But it's a very, very, very highly clustered sample for obvious reasons. This is very old-fashioned face-to-face surveying. Those interviewers stand right out there in particular polling stations. They don't move around. So they can only do that at a small number of places. 144 specifically in 2019. And it's much better to think of this as a small sample of places rather than a large sample of people. So it's 144 that's a relevant number, and all of a sudden that's not so big. Indeed, it would be nowhere near big enough if we just thought of taking a random sample of them fresh every time and going from there. So the one crucial thing, the most important part of the research design, which makes this all work, or at least gives us a chance of it working, is that it's a panel design, meaning that we look at changes in vote shares in those polling stations over time, from last election to this one. We take a difference, in other words. It's that differencing that cancels out most of the random variation, or much of the random variation, and all time constant biases in the results in the specific stations. So that's what we look at. That still leaves one challenge, which comes from that earlier bullet point, that we don't know the results, the official results last time at any given polling stations, because they're not released, only at constituency level. So the only way to know what happened in a polling station last time is to have been there last time as well. In other words, having had done the exit poll there even last time, which leads to a panel design of data collection. So the exit poll goes back to the same places every time in order to estimate that change. Like so. This is what the data looks like. This is 2015 to 2017. Each of those is a polling station in the exit poll. The green end is the 2017 result, and the line is the change. This is in sort of 2 dimensions, Conservative, the party shares, and all others together. What we really have is a sort of same thing, but in a 7-dimensional space, because we look at 7 parties and others. But that's harder to draw. So that's the outcome data. And what we're looking for in that, in the analysis, is regularities given characteristics of the places themselves, constituencies in which they sit. For example, like this. This is an example from 2017. The blue ones there are places which are with a particular characteristic. They were constituencies where on the whole Labour Party was popular winner previously, but which also went towards leaving the European Union in the 2016 Brexit referendum. That particular combination of characteristics was a type of place which in 2017 election was relatively favorable to the Conservative Party. If you stare hard, you can just see those blue lines being a little bit more towards the top corner rather than the average of the other lines. Of course, you don't have to look at it. We're doing statistical analysis in a moment. But that's the kind of thing we're looking at. Those kind of characteristics then turn into explanatory variables in the next step, which is the analysis step. So here's the methodology of the analysis of the exit poll, which produces the prediction. It's a sort of basically a modeling methodology. So there's a heavy dose of modeling here. It's not just a weighted survey estimation type of exercise. It's basically a modeling exercise on survey data, as it were. Step 1 is kind of what you saw already. We fit basically regression models in that 7-dimensional space, those outcomes for those 144 points, looking at those regularities, different types of explanatory variables for those directions of those changes, to build a model for that prediction. Then we apply that model in step 2 to all of the constituency, taking their result last time as one end of the change, and of course predicting the change, and hence predicting the share this time based on same explanatory variables. At which point, after step 2, we have a prediction of vote shares, as in percentages of vote for every party in every constituency. Then in step 3, those percentages are turned into probabilities using another form, estimated probabilities of each party winning each constituency, sort of assigning each constituency fractionally to each party. 90% to this party, 10% to this party, that sort of thing. And then finally, the prediction itself is adding up those probabilities across all parties, across constituencies, and rounding them up to round numbers. And that's what the audience sees at the end when the result is released. And that's how it's done. Done at some speed. I'll just briefly make a note of the peculiar feature of this to a statistician like me who normally don't work fast. This is done against the clock, because by definition, the data are all collected in one day. We work through on that one day in a secret location, cut off from the world. This is because leaking any of those numbers would be against the law. So we are sort of guarded, basically. We get the data in there, spend the afternoon selecting the model, those explanatory variables based on that year's patterns. And then we eventually produce prediction late in the day. It's a weekday election, a Thursday, so most people vote after work in the evening, so most data comes quickly at the end of the evening. The very last data drop before the broadcast comes at about 9:25, and the prediction has to be sent on to the broadcaster systems and their briefings at about 10:20, so there's about 15 minutes during which the final prediction has to be produced and checked and sent, which is fairly stressful. But very thrilling when it goes right, as it has done for all of these elections I worked with. Strange exercise. Okay, I'll take a minute or two more, the last 2 slides, to talk about something that's related but not quite the same, which is that, and something that is relevant even in places that don't do an exit poll, which is that when it comes to predictions arising when the counting starts, as it were, in the valvaka, any methodology that could have been used for an exit poll can also be used for early results that are actually declared. And that's what we do there as well. So for the night, the prediction team becomes employees of the BBC only, and we basically update the predictions now based on the declared results using the same methodology, using their result last time as the previous data point and updating the models and producing the predictions in the same way, starting with the exit poll. And that's what this looks like. What we have here is how that prediction evolved in 2019 from left to right. Left is 0, that's the exit poll, as a function of how many seats have declared the winner. 0 on the left is exit poll only, 650 on the right is the full final results, and everything in between is during the night. And the lines are the predicted shares at that time for each party, like blue, for example, is the Conservative Party. So basically, we spent the night watching those lines moving from left to right and hoping they don't go very far off from our initial prediction, which they didn't this time. So, and this has been basically what they've looked like for 5 years, all of those 5 elections. In other words, even early on, remember these declarations come in totally non-random order. So those places that are declared first are not at all representative of the general. Nevertheless, with a carefully designed modeling methodology, we can sort of produce a pretty stable prediction from essentially first moment of the declared results, which is quite encouraging for, I guess, any election program if you want to try to do that. And that's it from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm impressed by the nerves you must have. I can only imagine the stress it is to work with an exit poll like that. Thank you very much. Now we are reaching the end of the program, so we are going to have a panel discussion. So I will ask Joni, Juha, and Måns to come up on stage with me. And we will have Claire and Joachim online.
I hope I can sit with this. So
Yes.
this sound
Do we-
stuff.
Do we have Jone as well? He's switching something.
Testing, testing, testing. It was a side pocket.
What do you say, Johan? The nerves that he must
Yeah,
be.
it's impressive.
It's impressive, right?
Yep.
Right.
Absolutely. Takes a lot
Welcome,
of preparations.
Yes.
I want to start with a question. You were touching on that already, Johan, but should we publish election polls, let's say 2 days prior to the election or the day before the election? If we go just yes or no, what do you say, Måns? Should we publish?
I have not actually thought about that question before. I can't answer actually.
Really?
I have no opinion.
That is also an answer. Johan, what do you say? Should we publish election polls?
Yeah, I'm not in favor of a long-term ban on it, really, but I think they should not be published on election day, maybe not even on Saturday. I don't know. I have no clear limit, but I think it's totally okay for me with a few days before the election.
Yeah.
I don't see any harm in that information.
Yeah. Joni, what do you say?
I have been asked this question before because at some point after one of these less than perfect election results, polling results in the UK, there was an inquiry by this time the House of Lords, the other chamber of parliament, about election polls, and I gave evidence to it with others. And part of, or at least some members of that, partly clearly had this thought back in their mind that it would be, they would quite like to start banning polls. In the end, they didn't, and my answer at the time, as now, is no, we shouldn't. I think there are good reasons for not letting them be published until maybe not the election day itself, let's say, as in the UK, the night before.
The night before.
So that in the morning, election day, in the newspapers in the morning, you can publish predictions based on polls that were done the day before. You can't collect new data on election day, but that's line drawn in the sand. But my short answer after this long answer is yes, you should publish them.
Yeah. What do you say, Joachim?
I think so, but it's a rough question. I'm in favor of all information if the expectations are right. So it's a lot of communication involved in this as well. Just not just the results, but also how we communicate these results.
Yeah. Claire, you have been watching this in several elections. What is your view? I was following you closely in the French election, and there has been a ban, and now they have abandoned that ban.
Yeah, there is a ban of 1 day in France. What happened in 2017 is that 2 posters published, one in Belgium and the other in Switzerland, and they published results that were not the same as the other posters who published in France. So the thing is, when you ban polls, they are replaced by rumors. Or they can be published elsewhere. Anyway, so one, we cannot ban polls anymore because they can be published in the country besides yours. And second, when we do that, we cannot check that these polls are, we cannot check on the methodology of these polls. We cannot check that they are okay. And they are replaced by rumors. And more and more, there is movement till the last day. So not having polls on the last day before the election does not give a good information. And we've seen this also in Chile. They banned polls for 2 weeks, and the polls were not good. So everybody went on saying that this is because the opinion changed during these 2 weeks. We could show that it was not the case. But you see, it provokes all kinds of problems. But I think they should not be published on election day. That's for sure. They should be published the last day before the election, but not after that.
Thank you. So I think we have kind of an agreement. What do you say, Måns? No.
Yeah, it seems like that.
It's important for your model, at least, that you have that you have the polls.
Yeah.
But after listening to what we have been talking about today in the very interesting talks, thank you, all of you. Considering the new survey landscape and what we have discussed, this is a broad question, so you can interpret it the way you want. But what are the biggest opportunities in election polling? How can we use the new methods and the higher speed and the new media landscape to inform the general public? It's a big question, but you can. Do you want to start, Joni?
Oh, well, there seem to be two pieces in what you asked when you finished with saying inform the public, which was more about the communication. And I thought the question started in terms of opportunities for collecting the data and doing polls and so on. I think the first of those, i.e. how to do polls, maybe I'm a little old-fashioned, but I think it would be a mistake to think that there are some sort of incredible different new opportunities out there doing polling, any kind of surveying, in a totally different way, because ultimately we're going to ask people. The best way to get something out of people's brains is to ask them to bring them out to us. Watching them behave on Twitter or something like that is kind of several echoes away from that direct source. So I think we kind of know the tools of doing probability sampling. That's easy enough, but hard for election polls with the timing. So we are in this situation where sort of most election polls, I'm surprised to hear that Sweden, they aren't all like that, are basically non-probability samples, then with appropriate calibration weighting to adjust for this, that, and the other for which you have information. And others maybe have more imagination, but I can't think of any obviously better ways of doing it, new landscape or old landscape. And I think I'll leave it there and leave the communication part to others to comment on, because there might be much better and different opportunities out there.
What do you say, Johan? You are working with...
Yeah, but I don't have any clear idea about how to improve the quality in the new landscape, really, but more perhaps some ideas about what more new information could be made interesting before an election. But that's maybe not an answer to your question. But for example, now that almost all of the election pollsters are partly at least basing their results on some kind of web panel. Not all of them, but almost. This could give some more opportunities collecting true panel data, not recall data, for example, using data on what people actually had as a vote intention or a preference in an important political issue a while ago. And illustrating and actually probing and surveying reasons for change in large groups, because web panels are relatively large compared to a single survey. That could be used more, but that depends on the interest in the media houses, of course, whether they would be able to convey this kind of information in an interesting way. That's kind of an opportunity that new technology has created, but I don't have any ideas about how to increase accuracy, but as we have seen, maybe it's not even necessary always. Another thing would be passive data that the media publishers also have themselves and use for other purposes. For example, what kind of stories do people spend time on reading? And they are already tracking this information for their commercial purposes. They could also use this to illustrate an election campaign, because now people might be noticing what's in the right-hand column trending on Twitter or something. But that's not good enough. I think it could be better to see what kind of news articles do parts of the public, could also be segmented, spend time on reading as an auxiliary information, not just the polls of the parties going up and down, for example, but those more additional ideas how the media could illustrate the election campaign's progress in interesting ways.
And educate the audience.
Yeah, exactly.
Måns?
Yeah, I mean, coming to this as a statistician, in this collaboration with this prediction of the election, it was quite clear to me that me as a statistician is a really bad communicator. I mean, I'm not very good at this. So I think it's important to see, if you should do this in a good way, you need to collaborate. I mean, what made, all these nice graphs that I had, I mean, that was Jens Finnes that did that, and he's like a data-driven journalist or like a data journalist. So I think collaborating between journalism and statisticians or political scientists to actually, make journalism out of this is like one way forward that I think is quite reasonable. Especially now, I think data in journalism is becoming more and more salient. So I think that type of like collaborations between journalism and statisticians or political scientists and so forth is probably like a really good way forward for this communication part at least. Because, the plots I produce, they do not look remotely as nice as what Jens is doing. I mean, I had to admit that.
Claire, what do you say? I know APOR has a close collaboration with Poynter Institute, where journalists are educated how to understand survey data and polls.
Yes, I think the problem is mostly in willingness or laziness. What I get often from journalists is something like, if I mention margin of error, they just say, "Oh, you're not going to speak about the margin of error." Yes, I'm going to, but many journalists do not want to go through, understanding what it means and all that. I tried graphs where you see each poll, and our CBC here in Canada decided that they will take off all these dots for polls and have only one line. This is clear, everybody understands. So there is a tendency from the media to try to simplify too much, because I think citizens are ready to understand. They want to understand what's happening. And what happened in 2016 in the US is a good example of what we should not do. I did not find any information where people were told, okay, there is a margin of error here, okay, and Trump is so close to Clinton that it can be either way. This was not given as information to the people. So, and we think the APOR report think that some of the Clinton voters did not show up because they thought, with numbers saying 90% probability that Clinton is going to win, the people who didn't like Clinton that much did not go vote. And this is possibly one of the reasons why Trump was elected. So we really, really need to inform the population about the margin of error or credibility interval in the polls when you don't have a probability sample. And personally, I really do not like these things. The aggregators do this probability of winning, because I think people interpret it as it's sure. They don't interpret it as a probability. And it may influence campaigns.
Interesting, Claire. Thank you. Joachim, what do you say? You have been, before you moved to Abu Dhabi, you have been quite visible in the Swedish debate, talking about these issues.
Yes, I do agree. We need to be better on communicating uncertainty to the public. It is, and it has always been an issue for us statisticians, I think, to how to communicate this to the public and to the politicians, the government, entities using statistics. But your initial question, I think that actually the sky is the limit here. We haven't thought of all possibilities yet. in how to combine different kind of data together with survey data. Doing this, I think that we have to get rid of the notion to control the whole process from the start to the end. We need to focus on the process, accept data quality for what it is, and adapt the process after that. When we use administrative data or new data sources, that is. And I think we must be better in thinking of what is good enough according to what the public needs and wants, and what kind of information they desire.
Thank you, Joni.
Yes, on communicating uncertainty, I just wanted to mention an anecdote to do with the exit poll, which, as you can see, is a very highly visible thing controlled by the broadcasters, and which is clearly given as a pure point prediction, just those numbers. Or at least that's what it looks like. There is an uncertainty interval that comes with the prediction of sorts, not perfect, but it's there. But it's clearly not published. The broadcasters would never contemplate, as far as our experience suggests, of putting a confidence interval on the side of the Battersea Power Station, as you saw in those pictures. But there is a version of it, but it's after some negotiation over the years, not by me, but John Curtis and others, which is, I think, so subtle that it's almost invisible, which is that the language of the announcement. You saw on one of the pictures from one of the years, it says, as a summary of the prediction, Conservatives' largest party. And that was a phrase from a menu of phrases that are available in advance. 326 seats means overall majority. And if in our 95% interval, every single one of those simulated cases in that interval is over that, then that language would say Conservatives' overall majority. But because if any of them overlap it the other way round, or the other side it would say hung parliament or something like that. But if it spans that distance, then it simply says Conservatives' largest party, because in every interval they were bigger than Labour. So the choice of that phrase includes a certain element of acknowledging uncertainty, but in a way that, as I said, is basically not visible to the audience. But I think those broadcasters, in that context, for example, are just I think they underestimate their audience when they basically say, no, our views couldn't cope with intervals. I don't know if they're right about that, but it's a very, very strongly held view by them. And I don't know if SVT would behave differently and have a higher opinion of the Swedish audience, but that's how it goes in the UK.
Interesting. Måns?
Yeah, I mean, I find this really interesting. We published probabilities when we did the aggregation, and I think there's two parts here. So from a statistical perspective, to me, it makes total sense to talk about uncertainties in the form of probabilities, right? And I think in an academic context, we will all agree that probability is a reasonable thing to talk about. So that's where I come as a statistician. So I have these probabilities on different election outcomes. But then I think I also realize that this is hard for other people. And that is what
the general public, you mean?
Yeah, in the general public. And I think that is the journalistic problem, how to communicate that in a good way. I don't think it's the probability that's the problem. It's how to communicate that in a good way. And I know that we struggle a little bit with that. And I know that Jens worked hard to know how should we formulate this in a good way, how should we communicate this in a good way. So I think that's an area where I think journalists can start to think, how should we publish uncertainties? Because I think it's much more clear and truthful to show that we're uncertain about things than to just publish point predictions. Because everyone that works with statistics know that the point predictions, the probability for those actually happening is zero, more or less, right? So I think that's where the journalists need to come in to translate the academic notion of uncertainty in a way that is easy to understand for everyone.
I think we have to stop there. We are reaching the end of this year's Lyberg conference. And I would like to thank you all for participating. And this event has been recorded, and you will soon get an email with a link. And see you all next year. Take care and happy holidays.